I'm Brian Foster Kane, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call The Subjective Perspective. Have you ever been told the same story from multiple people and weren't quite sure what the whole truth was? The unreliability of information from multiple sources in the legal profession is often referred to as the Rashomon effect. The term was coined after one of the films in today's block, a film that ventured away from linear storytelling, presenting multiple versions of a single event told by 4 different eyewitnesses. This rare cinematic formula gave audiences a choice as to what they considered to be the truth. The reclusive mining tycoon turned media mogul Charles Foster Kane is dead. A reporter interviews Kane's friends, relatives, and associates, trying to decipher the meaning of Kane's dying words. Orson Welles was 25 years old when he directed the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies #1 ranked film, 1941's Citizen Kane. One horrific event is recounted by 4 individuals, each presenting a different viewpoint than the next. But who speaks the truth? The bandit, the wife, the woodcutter, the now deceased samurai? Akira Kurosawa ingeniously conveys the complexities of human nature in 1950's Rashomon. The sole survivor of an explosive battle on a cargo ship recalls a complicated backstory as to how he and 4 other crooks were roped into completing a job for the notorious criminal mastermind Kaiser Soze. But who is this boogeyman? Does he even exist? And what really happened on that ship? Bryan Singer directed and Christopher McQuarrie penned the screenplay for 1995's The Usual Suspects. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
All we saw on that screen was that Charles Foster Kane is dead. I know that. I read the papers. Wait a minute. What were Kane's last words?
How many keys, you cocksucker?
In English, please.
How many fucking keys, you cocksucker? What the fuck?
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster, and with me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
I'm fine, if you believe me.
That's your story.
That's my story.
Maybe I should ask 3 more people and get their point of view. Today is the day when we finally get to talk about the classic movie Citizen Kane, which was pretty much the impetus for how I wanted to start this podcast with Jeremy, because I had never seen these classics. Citizen Kane being one of those that I had never seen, even when I was supposed to watch it in film school. I faked my way through the papers we had to write. And yeah, no, I'm going to admit that now. It's been over 20 years. I think that's okay.
They might take those grades back. I don't know.
Let's take them now. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm already employed. So this was a great block. And Jeremy, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what makes this block unique, specifically from the whole subjective perspective idea.
Yeah, so the idea was kind of like, I was thinking about Citizen Kane recently. I was I read a review of Mank.
Oh.
And how they talked about sort of the making of Citizen Kane. So Mank, the movie, on Netflix is sort of the story of how at least the writing of Citizen Kane was done.
Herman J.
And in the review, they sort of mentioned something, how it's a story that's really interesting because it's told from all these perspectives about Kane, but not really from his perspective. And then I was thinking, oh yeah, well, okay, that's like Rashomon. And then, I was thinking, okay, maybe we should just do a film block on this type of idea of like what it means to sort of search for the truth when you always have to go through the filter of another person, or even yourself. I mean, in the case of Rashomon, they had the woodcutter give his own perspective, and it's like, well, what do we take from that as truth, and what do we take as his own version of the truth?
I mean, what was interesting about Rashomon was that one of the perspectives was from a dead man through the voice of a medium, and probably my favorite scene of that movie was when that medium starts going into
Exorcist voice.
Oh my God, was that awesome! And I wanted to bring that up. So Rashomon's really interesting how it's formatted, is that you're watching a lot of these different versions of this story play out, but you're also seeing a trial for this Tajomaru bandit who murdered this samurai.
Mm-hmm. Or did he?
Or did he, right? But the trial itself was just done in kind of a single shot. There wasn't really anything happening with the two people that were discussing the story in the back.
Right, and whoever like the judges were
right
in the trial, like they would say something, but the audience wouldn't hear it, and the character would be like, "Wait, what?"
They would respond to that.
Let me just respond, and then yeah.
What a great like low budget way to make a court scene, right?
Yeah. Well, it seemed like they were trying to make it a stage play adaptation, like right away, type of thing. Like,
well, that's what I wanted to bring up, was that it reminded me a lot of the scene when the in The Usual Suspects, when the crew get shaken down at the beginning, and Kevin, and he's like, "You bring enough guys this time," or whatever when he gave that. But it was very similar.
I can put you in Queens on the night of the robbery. Oh, really? I live in Queens. Do you have a team of monkeys working around the clock on this?
He was so good in that. But a lot of those shots, like one of them, I think Finster is just laying in a bed, and it looks like he's just on a set, and it's just like one big spotlight down on them, and it had that kind of same low budget approach, kind of like in a zero space, like in a void, if you will,
like
of
a black box theater.
A black box
world,
theater,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And that reminded me of the trial scenes in Rashomon. I thought those were very one-to-one there.
No, that's true. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, like that interrogation sequence. And it also, obviously is similar in the sense that, like, you are trying to figure out what's going on in that moment, and there's just a lot of, information intake.
Yeah.
I was a little worried about The Usual Suspects not quite fitting in with this block. It's like, okay, you take, two black and white movies from, the 40s and the 50s, and then try to put that into the sensibilities of the 90s. But it's interesting, so the way Citizen Kane jumps around in time, just, very fluid. Like, obviously there are moments where it's like, let me tell you, young man, and like, we kind of, drift off into a bunch of dissolves. But then there's also times where it's like, Merry Christmas, and he like hands him that new sled. And then he's like, and a Happy New Year, and he's much older. And it's like, there's that like sequence of like, I want to run a newspaper, and like, right. So it's like, you are just like fast forwarding through time really quickly. And same deal with Usual Suspects, where it's like the sound is the transition, where it's like that paint shaker turns into like, it sounds like a gunshot or something.
Yeah.
And like, we're all of a sudden in another space, and then fluidly moving through time, I think, ends up working really well. And then obviously with Rashomon and the way that these facts are being sort of interrogated, and then like what the what seems like the facts are, turn out to be different.
Which we never fully get in Rashomon. I don't think we ever get the full picture, right? We just get opinion from all three, or all four.
I think you can make that argument for all of the movies, actually. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's like,
especially Usual Suspects.
Yeah. And then with Kane himself, it's like,
right, that was all other people.
It was all other people's perspective on him.
Yeah, and some of them had been hurt by him, specifically his widow, who had been kind of, although he did a lot for her to try to turn her into a superstar, like an opera singer, she just didn't have the chops. But he kind of pulled her through that and like tried to, you got to practice. And he was giving all of her instructors shit too for no, you got to make her better. And he never like accepted that it was her. But because of that, then, she went through that whole process of trying to be an opera singer. It didn't work out. Then they're like locked in Xanadu together for like the rest of their days and just doing jigsaw puzzles. And it was like she might have felt a little slighted by him, or like
totally. Well, and you were saying that he was doing that for her, but from her perspective,
it was for him.
He was doing that for him.
Yeah, exactly. And he was. I mean, from that perspective, yeah.
Sure.
Because I think that was the big discussion at the end. Was like, yeah, I did all this stuff, but this was for you. You wanted the songbird,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way that Kane was portrayed, anyway, was always kind of like in this like search for love and for meaning and for acceptance and everything else. And, that was the idea behind his political career. That was the idea behind having the newspaper be on the side of the working man and all this stuff, and the song career of his second wife. But, all those things sort of led to him being self-destructive because the motivations for those things weren't altruistic. They were, at least from what we're presented, like motivations that like were all designed to sort of serve him and his ego, or like, get people to praise and love him.
I'd say that ego was portrayed perfectly in this movie when it came to Kane. Himself alone, he became a big, powerful guy as an old man, still like had nothing. He had this giant house that was never going to be completed. I love those scenes of when, those commercials of Xanadu, the giant castle, blah, blah, blah.
Well, so that part of it, like, is really interesting to talk about for a second, because like, it's hard to probably grasp what it must have been like watching that in the theater, because that is also how you would get news.
Right.
At that time.
It must have been confusing, confusing and entertaining.
Yeah, exactly. Or you could have been thinking, oh, maybe is this guy a real person? And like, that was like one of those things where, the thing that sort of really, really put Wells on the map was doing a different stunt like that
with War of the Worlds.
The War of the Worlds,
mm-hmm.
where it's like he puts this entertainment piece in the middle of a format that's designed to sound like news in a venue where people would be getting their news.
Yeah, on the radio.
Yeah. And like, so this is kind of similar, although obviously it didn't cause the same panic that the War of the Worlds radio stunt
that
did.
Caused like mass hysteria and suicides, I believe. Like that was a really crazy event. People thought we were being invaded.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, it also, I guess, parlayed him into getting the contract that allowed him to do Citizen Kane and have the sort of free reign to do all these crazy things and, break all the rules and everything he ended up doing in that movie.
I mean, let's talk about that. This movie felt like a large-scale experimental independent film. I mean, it clearly was way ahead of its time. Those deep focus shots specifically of him as a kid when Thatcher first goes to take him into his custody, and it just pulls from outside in through the window, and everything is still perfectly in focus, in composed. And you can I saw this, and I didn't know if I saw this correctly or not, but then I looked it up online. They push the tables in at the end, and you can just barely see them making their way in once the dolly comes back.
They're Hollywooding.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
But I mean, so seamless, some of those shots.
Right. But it's wild. It's like, today we end up calling some of those sequences that what you're talking about there with that flashback, where it's like, okay, we start outside, we come through the window, we come through the living room and into the sort of dining room, and then play that entire scene there. The mother gets up and goes to the window, throws open the window, and then we cut, and then we play the entire scene on that side as well. Anyway, like, they would do that so many times in this movie. It's to the point where, like, you didn't realize you were watching a oneer, but it turns out that it was a oneer. And, now we end up kind of referring to those as the Spielberg oneer, but I guess it should be the Wells oneer.
Sure, yeah. I mean, 1941 we're talking about.
for like how, sort of complicated and integrated the oneer was. It didn't like stand out like this is we're going for a record here on the how long we can sustain this thing, or we're not drawing attention to the fact that it's a oneer. But the scene just kind of plays and plays and plays and doesn't cut. Another great example is that transition from when he's like just starting the newspaper, going to like steal the Chronicle's newspaper reporters. And then,
the poaching scene.
Yeah, like we push it on that shot of those guys getting their portrait taken. We pull
from
out
the
of
picture,
it,
yeah.
From the picture, we pull out of it, and then start that whole like song and dance sequence, and that shot goes on for a long time, and it's like super complicated.
But it's not only like an entertaining shot though; it was also very comical at the same time.
Right. It's so dynamic. You're not even like looking to see that it is a show offy oneer. You know what I mean? It's like seamless.
And I've seen other directors do that in movies since then. I mean, obviously that's got to be something that people have taken notice to, because you see the paper with all the writers from the competing newspaper, and then they're right in the room with you in the same exact frame. There's like no transition at all. It's so slick. There was a lot of that. Like I don't think I could even name all the examples of that, but some of the shots in that movie were like very poignant. specifically at the end when, we start to get the close on Charles Foster Kane, and he's all alone. He's with his wife, but he is all alone in this big giant house, and he walks in front of that mirror, and there's an unlimited amount of Charles Foster Kane's
kind of going into infinity back there.
Exactly. It's kind of like that's all he has is himself. That's how I read that, and while he might have a lot of stuff, he has nothing really, like there's not. Yeah.
No, exactly. I like it was a really interesting expressionistic shot, and that expressionism is something they would do a lot in this, where it's like, he wouldn't be afraid to put characters to step into shadow where they're just a silhouette and you can't see their face at all, and then they take another step and all of a sudden they are fully lit, and you do it for these like dramatic moments, and the camera work in this is it's still sort of mind-boggling to look at, and especially when you're talking about that sort of someone ended up calling it like pan focus, but like the extremely deep focus where someone is millimeters from the lens, they're in focus. The person way in the background is also in focus. Someone in the middle ground is in focus. It's like when Kane was getting sort of kicked off of his paper in that one flashback, like that scene in particular, like the way that was like stacked.
Yeah.
I mean, you just think about like how crazy it must have been to light that.
Yeah.
That way, especially with how. So to have that depth of focus, you need to have a lot of light.
Right.
And then the amount of shadows in there are just nuts. The look of it is still like super impressive. I mean,
oh yeah.
Another thing that kind of stood out to me was when, he was arguing with the singer wife, whose name I'm forgetting, Susan Alexander Kane, is that right? And then she was like, no, I'm not going to go on. And he like, steps up in front of her and like steps in her light. And so she's just, totally silhouetted. But the only thing you can see is like this like really faint eye light on her.
It has a very noir quality to it.
Yeah, exactly. That same sort of expressionistic lighting.
When we first meet her through like a flyby of the top of the club that she's in.
Yeah.
I think it's a miniature. Mm-hmm. And then that miniature seamlessly goes from the video of the miniature into the video of the actual scene we're going to go into, but they did it through the glass of the miniature or somehow, and it was very seamless. Skylight. Like we go right through it. Like it's like, what year did this come out?
Yeah.
Mind blowing.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, it's here. The most mind blowing part is that like, when they started filming, Orson Welles was 25.
Yeah.
And was 26 when the movie came out. He was 20 when he first became semi-famous for doing the Voodoo Macbeth, the sort of like the WPA sponsored jobs program. So in the Great Depression, part of the New Deal recovery was to like just create jobs.
Sure.
And one of them was to like sort of fund the arts, and with this they took this sort of theater prodigy who was 20 years old and put him in charge of this theater in Harlem, and he did Macbeth with an all-black cast and ended up setting that in sort of Revolution era Haiti instead of the 1200s Scotland.
Yeah.
And but
still a ghost story, right?
Yep. But he did this thing and it became a big sensation. It ran and kept getting extensions and like toured all around the country. And, it was his sort of first sense of fame. And he was like, 20 years old when he did that. And then was like 23 when he was on the cover of Time because, out of that theater experience with what was dubbed Voodoo Macbeth because it, took place in Haiti. He started the Mercury Theater Company, which then, did not only theater, but did a bunch of radio plays. And because of the sort of stunt with War of the Worlds, sort of garnered him this contract to do 2 pictures with RKO. And Kane ended up being the first one. It was like not the first one he pitched, but it was the first one that they ended up doing. His
biggest film, right? By far.
Well, I think so. I mean, it certainly is the one that has garnered the most cachet since then. At the time, it did make a huge splash, but it's because, a lot of this stuff was sort of based off of the life of William Randolph Hearst.
Right.
And one of Hearst's, Hearst's mistress was also, it was an actress or whatever, and so that was sort of the parallel they were drawing a little bit with the Susan Alexander character.
Was there also a scandal with running for president or running for mayor or anything like that? Or
yeah, Hearst did do those things. He was he ran for different offices and crashed and burned a couple times, and he also, which they covered in Citizen Kane, he was one of the other prominent papers aside from the Pulitzer paper that drummed up and sort of created the Spanish-American War.
Dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems, I'll provide the war.
Wow.
Which they do talk about a little bit in Citizen Kane.
Fake news.
Yeah, fake news. Yeah, they were definitely in the fake news business.
Yeah.
And there were several differences between the Kane character and the real-life Hearst. But there were also a ton of similarities with, like the way he did the paper, the way he would do, lying about everything he posted there, the way he, would run for this and that, had sort of a mistress in the arts, built the palace to himself. It was...
Is that Hearst Castle in...
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think at the time it was called San Simeon, and then it was the estate was the size of Rhode Island, but it was, sort of there and... north of Santa Barbara. It's up there in that Central Valley area, but on the coast. Anyway,
I can relate.
Then, yeah. Yes. God. But one of the biggest differences, I guess, was that his mistress, who I'm forgetting her name, the one who was in the arts, she and he had an actual relationship. He didn't get divorced from his wife, but they cared for one another, and he wasn't trying to build her into something she wasn't. And she was the one who would throw these parties for Hollywood, and all the sort of Hollywood folks would be going to San Simeon all the time. And that's how Mankiewicz got up there, which then sort of inspired this tale about
interesting
the Kane character.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and there was a lot of stuff that wasn't just Hearst. It was also Wells, the Kane character was based on Wells, Wells orphaned by, whatever, age 6 or something. And then also sort of parts of the Kane ego was that of this kid who from apparently age 5 was, considered a genius and a prodigy. And, considering some of his early success, that wasn't just, blowing smoke up his ass. I mean, with this movie being this record, we can totally see that genius. But, because of him taking on Hearst and Hearst's connections with Hollywood, because, by the time this thing came out in the sort of 40s, the Hearst paper empire was, teetering a little bit, and it had become more of just a gossip magazine.
Oh.
But because of that, they had a lot of dirt on, Hollywood people, and, were threatening to release some of this stuff if they released Kane. And one of the, studio heads offered RKO close to $1 million to buy the print of Citizen Kane and destroy it.
Holy shit, just to destroy it?
Just to destroy it, to please Mr. Hearst.
$1 million and 41.
The old man, as they called him. What's that?
$1 million
exactly.
and 40 or 41. I mean,
it was 800,000, but yeah, I was just saying nearly. But yeah, yeah.
Still a lot of money for them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was highly contentious. It had trouble getting released because of those things. And on the second picture of his 2-picture deal with RKO, he certainly didn't get the creative freedom and everything else that he was given on this one.
What was the second picture?
It became the Magnificent Ambersons, which, if you've ever seen it, it's nowhere near as good as Kane.
Okay.
And a lot of that has to do with, supposedly anyway, it being stolen from him. And every day there were suits on set, and then like, he would be kicked off, and like they would like, roll like 30 people in of like the studio crew, and like, here, just finish this one, okay? And that was how that movie ended. And then from sort of the rest of his career, it was a lot of like sort of piecemealing things together. I mean, in that, he did end up making some good stuff. I mean, I really, really like F for Fake, and of course Touch of Evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would act in things, and because he and Joseph Cotten were both in The Third Man kind of feels like a Wells movie, even though it's not. But the most famous speech from that movie he wrote, so it's like it kind of has that Wells feel.
And Joseph Cotten was from the theater troupe as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the players.
Theater, exactly. Yeah.
Let's talk about the Mercury Theater players. Some of them are starring in their first movie today.
Well, that was the thing, is that apparently everybody...
they were just theater people?
I guess except for one waiter that they hadn't cast in time, came out of this theater troupe or had never been in a movie before. And that was like sort of their calling card when they came to talking about this movie, and bragging about how it was not as Hollywood as everything else. But yeah, so I mean, that whole like Hearst thing, of course, like sank Wells, and the rest of his life was spent very humbled, trying to do Paul Masson ads and guest appearances on TV shows and whatever else, doing magic and shit to try and like finance his Don Quixotes and The Trial and all these movies he made in Europe or didn't end up making.
Right. The Don Quixote, like Man of La Mancha,
Yeah, I mean that was kind of like how they described it on when Terry Gilliam tried to make that movie.
Lost in La Mancha was the documentary.
Where it was like, Wells had tried it and failed, and like then Gilliam tried it and failed as well. Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course it's sort of a sad thing, but I guess if you have something as brilliant as Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil out there, then that's more than most people.
Yeah, not bad. I mean,
yeah.
I could hang my hat on 3 movies and be pretty proud of that.
Indeed.
I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about the lighting of Citizen Kane, cinematography, etc., that it really did feel in many ways like the gothic horror movies we had watched. Specifically Xanadu. It had that old manor vibe of, The Shining, right. For the hotel and some of the other films we watched. But also that this genre, or I guess we're calling it that, the subjective perspective genre that we've just made up for this show, feels like anthology film. And it feels like it could be.
That's a good observation.
It could kind of go both ways, and you could definitely make a case for Citizen Kane being in many ways like an anthology of, or even Rashomon, of these multiple versions of one story, but they're all a different story. And I think it'd be an interesting take on that. Now, you were talking about, movies not fitting in with this group. I think Rashomon and Citizen Kane fit in really well together, but I think Usual Suspects is the one that kind of is a little bit different in this instance. It's only from one person's perspective.
That's what I was saying,
yeah.
Kind of, but it's like, yeah, that's true. That's true. That's what I was saying, but I feel like it does end up fitting a lot in terms of like just sort of the meta form that the stories take on, or like, how they sort of fast forward through time, the way that, we get this, it's not exactly a trial, but it's an inquisition by the Chaz Palminteri character.
Yeah.
And
Agent Coolian.
Yeah. Some of those things.
I was in a barbershop quartet in Skokie, Illinois.
It's like real fat, orca fat.
Yeah. My mom lives right next to Skokie, so I always thought that was a funny line. I want to talk about Rashomon again. First time seeing this, and since this is our second Kurosawa film now that we've watched, while I did enjoy I did like Hidden Fortress more than this. Mm-hmm. However, I think this one is a little bit more like creative or crafty. I don't know how to say it, because it's just such like a nonlinear presentation. And it's just funny because, like growing up, I see Tarantino's films, and I watch Pulp Fiction. I'm like, oh, this is the first guy that ever told something out of order. There's no way that anyone's ever done that. Right. And then I go into these movies, and from the 40s on,
No, totally.
But Kurosawa, I mean, let's just say it again, even in the 4:3 aspect ratio that this movie is presented in, he still really nails that wide shot, and he really nails the environment that they're in, and just these long takes just bringing you into this jungle or forest where this event happens from the beginning of the film. You really feel like he's like, this is where you are. We want you to feel where you're at. Get an idea of what this environment is, and he doesn't shy away from really long, beautifully composed shots. Some of them being handheld, but also well composed.
They're all like difficult shots out in the woods like that.
Exactly. The one where our, I guess he's the farmer of the group.
The woodcutter.
The woodcutter, exactly.
The Takashi Shimura character.
We follow him to start, and he walks over that tree trunk, and we just follow up over, he walks over us. I mean, really well done stuff,
That scene, which is like, pretty much the opening. I remember trying to watch this movie a couple years ago, but it was really late at night, and I was like nodding. I was like, oh no, I'm not going to make it.
Even with that booming score happening? Oh man. The scores in the film is great.
It is really, really long. Like, it goes deep and deep and deep into the woods, and it's like, there is something like really interesting about how that journey into the forest, got started. And it's like, it is really long. It's really deliberate, and it's definitely tough to watch. I'll have to admit, late at night type of thing when you're nodding off.
Yeah.
But it's less engaging, let's say, than Hidden Fortress.
Yes.
But there's something like, because it's so deliberate there, it makes you think that he's putting this emphasis on there for a reason, and that this is sort of like this visual metaphor of like, so how far away, it's like we're that far as his walk is how far away we are from understanding what actually happened in the clearing there.
Yeah, and we never get that whole story, but we do meet Mifune again as Tajomaru, the bandit, who is obviously well known across the countryside because everyone knew who this guy's name was. He was like a infamous.
He always does that laugh.
I love that, man. Because that reminded me of when he was in that full samurai gear in Hidden Fortress.
Yeah. Well, he had a kind of similar look here, where it's a lot of like exposed leg and stuff in this one.
But he didn't get to wear his full underwear or his full
that's right. Yeah.
Borat suit or whatever that was. Yeah. But in this one, we get, is it 3 different stories, or do we technically get 4 different?
4. Yeah.
We get 4, right? Okay.
Because we get the thief, the wife,
Yeah.
the ghost,
Yeah.
and the woodcutter.
Right. So the
It's
samurai,
like a reveal. Like he didn't give the speech at the trial.
No, but they questioned him
at the Rashomon gate.
Right. Yeah. He was just being kind of questioned. And that's why I kind of got the impression that he might have been the closest to the truth, or at least that's what Kurosawa wanted us to buy into, because he wasn't like on trial giving that messaging or whatever, like that was just him. I guess they were trying to get information out of him. I guess that was kind of the end of the film. And like, I really loved the whole idea of goodness might be make-believe, according to the people discussing things in Rashomon. That's actually what he said. Goodness might not exist. And we see all these different viewpoints, and none of them are really that great. They all turn out pretty damn bad. I mean, obviously it's a murder is what this trial is all about, and a rape, and a potential suicide, depending on what, right? So there might be a harakiri involved, but then that gets squashed because there's no dagger in the woman. Like, that wasn't part of it. So that story was like off the table. And there was like all this.
Well, kind of, but like the one guy kind of called him out and said, "Oh, maybe you stole the dagger because it's valuable or whatever." Yeah. And we don't know if that's true or not. We don't know.
And I think it was really interesting to set this amongst like a dark and stormy night too. It was almost like
or a dark and stormy day.
A dark and stormy day, yeah. But yeah, it was like really, really interesting. And that's why I can definitely see why we put that with Usual Suspects. Because it's just like, I mean, that just made total sense. And when I was watching this, I'm like, oh, these are going to be so fun to talk about.
Yeah, what I really like watching it this time around, I mean, I'd seen it sort of in high school, and I think when we talked about Hidden Fortress, talked about like, I went through a huge sort of Kurosawa phase, and this was during his pretty prolific period where he's just, cranking out a movie a year or sometimes two. And, you can really see him in his prime, flexing some of that storytelling stuff. And the idea that you'd make a movie where you don't show the sort of like capital T truth of what happened, and that like even the sort of like bookend, like the Shakespearean chorus that we kind of see in the beginning there, and you don't get much out of those guys other than more explanations, like a fourth telling of the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely one of those things where the film form was kind of pushed forward in a way.
Yeah.
And, because it also became, pretty famous and pretty well regarded and all these things, it debuted in Venice and then became this like, sensation. But this movie kind of like brought, the spotlight on the Japanese film industry and that kind of thing. And, this is like, obviously they're sort of processing the war in this movie. Like they're sitting that sort of the ruins of this. Essentially, it would be like a city gate, like the inside of this, like
The Torii Gates.
Yeah. And this is like a busted area there. I'm like, we don't exactly know what happened, at least in the context of what the story was telling us. But, the priest does say like, well, it's like there's earthquakes and fires and wars and famines and plagues and this and that. And he's like, year after year, it's been nothing but disasters.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that resonated with the Japanese audience at the time, having just gone through World War II. And obviously that also the war touched down on the soil there.
Right.
But, so I'm sure that there was a lot of, being processed with that. But then I think Kurosawa, what I saw as like sort of seemingly optimistic as most of his films seem to be, there's definitely this like streak of pessimism. I mean, Ron in particular, this movie, whether or not humans are redeemable in his eyes is definitely a question that it seems like his answer is no. And
that sucks.
Here it's like everyone's sort of faith in people are shaken. I mean, it's like, they were like, oh, well, what happened? Like, oh, one guy died. Okay, so what? I mean, tons of people died. I mean, sure, if we look over that rock over there, we'll find 3 people. Like, so what? And then the circumstances of how the person died all of a sudden, made it interesting for people, or for the audience of 3 people out there waiting in the rain.
Well, I was interested just because of the drama that they were talking about. I mean, this was a very, depending on the perspective, a very dramatic event. A bandit comes, rapes a woman, and then the man, because now that she has been with another man, even though it's through rape, he gives her up. Again, depending on how you look at it, the husband
story,
the husband says, no, you need to go with him now. Or the wife is like, no, you need to take me now, bandit, and you need to kill my ex-husband now. Yep. Or it was, I'm going to die. Oh. But I think you're right. I don't think that there was ever a good story, an optimistic story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of what the baby's story was supposed to be.
Hope.
Was supposed to be this like little glimmer of hope in all of this rainy world. The guy's like, look, I've got 6 other kids. 1 more won't matter.
Yeah. You're going to take it? Yeah. What's the difference? What's 1 more kid?
Yeah.
That part did confuse me a little bit because it kind of comes out of nowhere at the end. Because I wrote it down. I'm just like, baby crying? And I was like,
apparently you can survive and have 6 kids on a woodcutter salary in feudal Japan.
Oh, inflation sucks.
Yeah. But what's kind of crazy is all but the woodcutter story. So the bandit story, the wife story, the husband story. Every time that the storyteller in those 3 instances told the story, the storyteller took credit for the murder. or
Yeah.
the death, I should say.
The death.
If it's suicide, but like, which is a really interesting, like, way to portray everybody. It's like, normally you'd think that if someone's telling a story, especially on trial, that they would want to deflect blame to someone else. But in this case, it was like, no, I did it. No, Your Honor, you don't understand. I did it.
There was a bit of pride behind that too.
Yeah.
To tell that version of it.
Yeah, that's true. But I love seeing the immense contrast with the woodcutter story.
Yeah.
And how cowardly their fight was, and how inept and like terrible they were at fighting.
Yeah, Tejomaru wasn't that much of a fighter. And in fact, he kills the samurai.
At least not according to the woodcutter, yeah.
Yeah, and according to the woodcutter story, he kind of kills him by accident. It was kind of like him shaking a sword like the shakiest gun in the West.
Yeah.
And takes him out that way.
Yeah.
So let's go into Usual Suspects. Obviously, the similarity lies in the fact that we've got Verbal Kent, who is not on trial. He actually has immunity in this film as a criminal. But he is definitely...
It's sort of a trial. Yeah,
it is a trial.
Like,
he's definitely on the hot seat with Agent Kulian.
Right. It's not lawyers and judges and juries and stuff, but
This is just a closed door situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just use your office there, guy from Cheers.
Wait, who's guy from Cheers?
The other guy that works with Kulian,
Dan Hedaya?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. He was so good.
Yeah, no, he's also like very memorable or whatever. Like, you want to see a real horror show? Look at my garage. Horror.
Get me a coffee.
Yeah. Oh, God. Real quick, before we move on to Usual Suspects, like one last horror thing was really funny. Was like, not only was the medium voice in Rashomon really scary and kind of Exorcist-like, but the wife, multiple times when they would cut to her, when she would do that insane laugh, it reminded me so much of the Henrietta monster laugh.
Ooh.
In Evil Dead,
Yeah.
where it's like,
because she, again, by perspective, she had a mean streak to her. She seemed pretty nasty. I mean, obviously she was in a bad situation. I don't want to minimize that or anything.
Sure.
But
and even by her own
exactly
tale, that she had the mean streak too. But anyway, the Henrietta monster thing I meant to mention earlier and I forgot to mention it.
Yeah, I mean, there were actual horrific and supernatural moments in Rashomon that kind of took me by surprise. Specifically, the dead man's story coming to life through a medium.
Yes.
And that version of a medium was so awesome. It was like almost like a shaman, with the bones
really
and the beads and everything. I was like,
and the voice itself was just was nuts. Yeah.
And he had those real close-ups of, like he was screaming directly into the camera. Like as a person watching that movie in 1950, that must have been, again, maybe that's why it made such a splash, is that it was so different, right? I mean, that was way out there, in the best way. I mean, it wasn't like it was hard to understand. It was just very, very intense and interesting. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah.
It was so good. I really love that
intense.
film. But I do want to move on to Usual Suspects. One of my favorite films when I was, in college and in high school. This was one of those movies that I was like, okay, this is pretty much perfect. I mean, since then, I'm not the biggest fan of Bryan Singer, not the biggest fan of Kevin Spacey now. They've kind of gone down their own path of...
But you are a huge fan of the other Baldwin brother, Stephen Baldwin?
No, I like the one from Vampires.
Oh, yeah. Daniel Baldwin?
This is Stephen Baldwin's best role. I actually have a note to talk about that he is... he's Finster.
No. Finster's Benicio del Toro.
Oh, sorry. What's
He's McManus.
McManus. Sorry, McManus. Yeah, McManus. McManus was my favorite character in this by far. Even though I loved Finster, I just couldn't understand what he was talking about or what he was saying. But that was part of him. But I thought McManus kind of played. Even though I would say that some would argue that Keaton was the main character that was kind of bringing you through the story, I could relate more to McManus. He was kind of like, who the hell's this Verbal Kent? He was the only one that was kind of making a big deal about who this guy was. He's the only one that really like put up a fight. And Keaton was just kind of there he was kind of just to play the good guy, I think. But McManus was more like the realism guy out of the group. But I think that this is his best movie by far. And the fact that he took a cigarette to the eye from Redfoot or
from Zed.
Yeah, from Zed, exactly. Zed's dead, baby. Yeah.
Or the bad guy from The Mask.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a little payback or back pay?
Back pay.
I'm just the next employee who's come for his back pay, or should I say payback?
We'll have to figure out a time to watch The Mask. I think we brought that up in one of the last shows too.
I think so. But as soon as I saw it, I was like, "Oh, The Mask."
I think this movie, first of all, is really well done. You never get the true story from this. It's only from one person's perspective. So like Rashomon, it kind of takes that similar theme, but it focuses it on this one person, Verbal Kent, who is handy capable. However, he might not be. And the way that they present
faking it.
This way they present him throughout the movie as not being able to light a cigarette, not being able to run properly or walk properly, and then have him literally go through the evolution of man at the end and stand upright and start walking, and then he lights his cigarette. Even though I knew that was coming after seeing this probably for the 20th time, I was like, they really nailed that last scene. And the fact that all of that story is probably bullshit. He kept this guy going the whole time. Redfoot is fake. It was a name from the wall. The barbershop quartet bullshit was on the bottom of the cup. The big fat
Kobayashi on the bottom of the cup, but it was on the bottom of the poster board.
What was on the bottom of the cup?
Kobayashi.
Sorry, yeah. So there was that, and so Kobayashi, even though he was a real person, he might not have had that name, right? He might have been
He might have been named Pete Postlethwaite.
Right. I think he just died recently, right?
Yeah, he did.
He was also great in this movie for being such a smaller role. He nailed those scenes that he was in. And I just love the way that he would talk and explain things to people.
I believe you, Mr. McManus. I most sincerely do.
Now, Mr. McManus, you need to be calm now, Mr. McManus.
Before you do me in, Mr. McManus, you will let me finish my business with Miss Finneran first, won't you?
But yeah, I mean, overall, I guess this is kind of my rant review of Usual Suspects. A 1995 film, so brand new. But I think basically perfect throughout. I don't like the fucking cops line at the end. It takes me out of it. Verbal Kent's like last line. It kind of
really? I love that.
Oh god, I think you brought it up on a previous show, and you like, yeah, fucking cops. I was just like, oh god, he could have said something much better there.
Fucking cops.
Yeah, what is it? He's trying to like convince Kuyan in Kuyan's own story that Keaton was behind all this shit.
That he was Kaiser Soze.
That Keaton was Kaiser Soze.
Yeah.
And trying to make himself as pathetic as possible. And that line was supposed to also sort of nail that home.
It works, yeah.
And had Chaz Palminteri not wanted to like hang out with a cold cup of coffee and survey the messy office,
I just love how
he's gotten away with it.
How he sits on Dan Hidea's desk too. He's just like, I did it. I really got this done. He just starts going through that, scanning that wall, and he's like, oh shit. Where'd the cripple go? Which way did he go? He went that way.
The only way you can go, that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, out the door maybe. He asking the evidence guy there.
Yeah. Oh man. But like, how great was that? I mean, okay. What I was gonna say was that there is something. All three of these movies are very stylish in a way, and this movie in particular like has a lot of great style in certain places, and then a lot of style that I remember even at the time, like watching it in the '90s, was like, oof. Like the way they sort of hold their guns sideways, or it's like there's some like corny stuff that's in there, or like the old McDonald's shot some guys lines that like certain moments that were like sort of too clever in a way, or like too cutesy.
Cutesy, yeah.
Yeah, but there's so many things that are just like still like so undeniably effective.
Yes.
That like, you can't help but love the movie. And of course, like the biggest one is the ending. That sort of that montage. Kuyan running out after him. He gets in the car, gives a quick nod to Pete, and they drive around the corner. And Palminteri is like hearing all this stuff back in his head, and he's like, "Oh no!" And he's like, "The car's right there," and like. You get the like, and then you'll never see him again. And then like, there's that hit on the strings, and from the just amazing John Ottman score, which by the way, one of the main themes is sort of stolen from JFK. If you remember that scene,
I've got that right here.
Nice.
Was it the same composer?
John Williams was JFK.
Wow, that's interesting.
Ottman, yeah.
Okay.
So clearly, what happened was like while they were doing a couple of those scenes, they were using the JFK soundtrack as temp, and then they fell in love with it, and then they had to kind of like fake it.
Interesting.
But some of the score that's not a ripoff, at least that I'm aware of, especially that ending, was just like so key, and that like that hit of the strings right before we cut to black and we're out of it, and just in terms of a cinematic moment, it's hard to get better than that in terms of just the complete package that it was.
I mean, I've seen it on several top 10 lists and things of the best endings or best conclusions of films. I mean, that's one of them that's going to go down in history as being one of the best in terms of closure, I think. While Rashomon might still have a complete story there, we've got the story of one of the most notorious criminals ever, in Kaiser Soze, who's
Kaiser
this...
Kaiser Soze! Nemetes! What? Kaiser Soze!
I love that, because he's just speaking Hungarian, and all of a sudden we'll say Kaiser Soze, and everyone looks.
And I love that Giancarlo Esposito is like smoking a cigar in the intensive care unit.
Walks right into the burn unit. Sir, you can't smoke that in here. And he's just like, where the fuck do you want me to put it? He was a great kind of an old school cop character in that. He had that like trench, the hat, the cigar, like he had that real
and he
gritty.
also had that like very cynical attitude that like nothing's gonna change here, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Run it up the flagpole, and like it's like it was like this perfect sort of contrast to the very passionate Chaz Palminteri character who was like dying to get this thing done.
But the crime, though, is solved. The actual crime is solved in that we know why that hit was put on the boat was to remove that guy that could finger Soze, right?
Yeah.
When we thought that there was dope being on the...
who was like also part of that, was assassinated, and like
we found her dead in her hotel room.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Kind of man who could kill Edie Finneran. No, but it's so great. Like we're seeing these recycled shots of Gabriel Byrne just sitting around thinking, which he does throughout the movie, and you see him as this like tortured character. He wants to go straight and he keeps getting pulled in and all these things. And then you see it in this other context.
With the context, exactly.
Of Chaz Palminteri, framing him as Kaiser Soze, and you see those looks not as being upset that he's getting pulled back into the life of crime, but rather that he's this mastermind and he's just like brilliant and cold and evil.
How sound design can change a visual.
Yeah. Well, I also it's storytelling context, but yeah.
No, it's just sound design.
Oh, it's sound design. Yes,
that
sound
is
design.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because like most of the time when you get these stories of like, oh, it was all a dream or whatever, it's very much a cop-out. It's very much it's not satisfying, and it's just like, all right, well, then why did we spend all this time here? In this instance, like, even though it's very hazy, you do still get a picture of what this was, and the idea was that essentially Kaiser Soze is, designing all this to sort of get rid of anybody who can ID him or put these things on him, and to like put that trail onto to Keaton, like sort of frame him for that.
With now Keaton being dead, that means that the Kaiser Soze is dead, technically, right? So people would stop looking for him, although I would see a sequel to this film as Coolion looking for, like, just obsessing over Kaiser Soze forever and trying to find Kevin Spacey. Obviously, that movie's not going to happen. I got to say, man, I was really afraid of watching Citizen Kane after all of this time, like hearing about it being so great, hearing about what Rosebud is and all that stuff. However, I think that movie ended extremely well. Again, I think that there was some great closure on a film. We see Rosebud going up in flames, and then we see the chimney stacks of Xanadu belching out black flame. You know, it's like no matter what this guy did in life, you know, all these possessions that he had, they're just going up in smoke. And it really kind of brings about that idea of that all that really matters in life is what you do while you're living it. Once it's over, it's like it's done and it's gone, and that legacy can just go up in smoke, you know?
Yeah, well, it's like kind of also a commentary on, like, you know, his accumulation of all that crap.
It's crap.
The only thing that meant anything
Stuff.
to him was this one thing that he could never find. And it was like, you know, also this thing that, like,
and it was buried in his stuff. He still had it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also, you know, it's like this, obviously, it's the life that he could have had. Like, you know, he always choked. He said, what was the line? He's like, I always gagged on that silver spoon.
Yep.
I could have been a great person if I wasn't rich. And, I can't remember, like, last time I watched it, maybe it was like, I was wondering, like, man, what the hell? Why did the bank want to adopt this kid? So, like, the machinations were, like, the bank, like, owned this house, but the mother owned the gold mine or whatever that then made Kane rich. So the bank was involved, and they were, like, going to essentially take him away from the parents and raise him themselves. That's the Mr. Thatcher character. And for me, I was like, well, why the hell did this happen? And I think that the answer is, just from watching it this time, the answer I came to anyway, was that because he would be in charge of all this stuff when he hits 25 or whatever the age was. And the bank wanted to sort of groom the heir to, you know, do their bidding or whatever.
But instead, all he wanted to do was own the paper.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to run a newspaper.
Fun?
Yeah.
I love those fourth wall breaking moments, too, when they just look right at they're like,
stare
fun?
at the camera. Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah, I got to say, I mean, the point I was getting at before was that I was a little afraid that I wouldn't like Kane, or that it wouldn't. I loved it so much.
Really? Okay, great.
Oh, I loved it so much. I can see, this is one that I could rewatch over and over again without a problem. I thought it was just...
Did any of these three get the Chrissy treatment?
Usual Suspects. She hadn't seen Usual Suspects yet. Again, loved it. And I think that was probably the best of the three for her to watch, just because she'd already seen Kane. And,
really?
Yeah, she'd already seen Citizen Kane. Yeah, I know. She beat me on that one. But Rashomon, I just didn't present that one to her, but I bet she would really enjoy it. Just... From a visual perspective alone, you don't really need to know the story. You can figure it out. It's such a visual movie. It's so perfectly done. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the first time that we've had 3 for 3 classics on this block, or on this podcast. I might be wrong.
Well, we did the Psycho, Texas Chainsaw,
that's right.
Silence. I mean, I think those ones. They're not the necessarily the AFI top 100 list like maybe these ones would be.
Is
like
Citizen Kane number 1?
It was for a long time. I don't know if it still is on AFI, but you know those other ones, the Ed Gein movies were definitely like pop culture.
Sure.
Everyone knows them even if they haven't seen them, type of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I think these are like you know, I don't know, the cinephiles pick of, like, you know, 3 really well regarded movies.
Well, I think we can wrap it up then. I think we've touched on anything, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up.
No. The only other thing I wanted to say was like, as much as I kind of like dunking on some of the cutesy dialogue in Usual Suspects, like one moment in particular that wasn't so cutesy, but like always stuck with me, was when the sort of gang of thieves were sitting in the car in San Pedro Harbor before the job that would be on the Argentinian ship. And they're like looking at it, they're like, okay, there's going to be 10 guys here, there's going to be another 10 guys coming there. And they're thinking they're screwed. And Stephen Baldwin has the line, McManus has the line about the news said it's like raining in New York.
I just can't believe we're going to walk into certain death.
News said it's raining in New York.
And it's just like kind of this throwaway moment, but it's like, everyone's contemplating that they're all going to die. And like, the news talking about how it's raining in New York, this like sort of minor inconvenience versus like if they had just stayed in New York, like, all this could have been averted type of thing. There's just like something sort of like beautiful about just like that tiny little moment that sort of captures this, sort of existential dread that they were all feeling. And
they knew they were screwed, right? I mean, This was a suicide mission from the get-go. And the person that enlisted them to do it was looking to kill them anyway, and they knew it.
Yeah.
Right? Because at one point in your career, you stole from Mr. Soze.
Yeah. And the fact that you did not know that you stole from Mr. Soze.
This is why you are still alive today.
Is this a great, like, lilting, like, sing-song? One other thing that, like, it was, like, I remember the movie like looking just amazing. I remember like the Newton Thomas Siegel shot this, and like the look of it really, really impressing me. I mean, this time around there were certain scenes that were less impressive than others, but one thing in particular that always really, really got me was like that moment where Kobayashi gets in the elevator with his two bodyguards. They start on sort of the ground floor, and before we get outside with the daylight and everything, it's like pitch black in there when they cut the elevator lights off, and then it's like we see one shot to one guy and we see the guy look over, and then one shot to the other guy, and then we pull up into the daylight, and then there's nothing but like blood like running down
He's framed
sides.
With blood on either side. Yeah.
Oh man, that was so awesome.
So awesome.
And they did that same gag shot by the same cinematographer in Confessions of a Dangerous Mind.
Okay.
But I think it was probably most effective in this one. I mean, like, the actual like cinematic storytelling of Usual Suspects is still really holds up despite some of the maybe dated cutesiness with some of the other stuff, and like kind of riding on some of that Pulp Fiction wave of like, oh, let's do funky crime movies or whatever, right? And like, even though there were tons and tons of movies coming out at that time, like semi-indie movies coming out at that time, that were all like Pulp Fiction ripoffs, if you want to count this one as one of those, like, it's probably the most successful version of those.
Yeah, I wouldn't call this a ripoff by any means, but I see what you mean, like in the same era of films, of crime films.
Like, if you're thinking about like
mid-90s crime films,
the snooted up, like a gang of agents, like, I think we can do another Pulp Fiction. Okay, look. The Pulp Fiction movie was sick. Okay, and you just do like sick stuff, and they're talking about nothing, and they're like, woo! Let's do this, dude. Let's do this.
Wait, you're saying this thing right here made us $25 million? Do that again, then. Just do the same thing again,
dude.
Change the names,
dude. Listen, we can do this. We can fucking do this.
I think one of those movies was 2 Days in the Valley or something like that. That was like a blatant.
There were tons of them.
There were a ton around that time. It was like 95 and on. Was
kind
just
of like ensemble casts and fancy clever dialogue. Trying to replicate the Tarantino sound.
Right.
But this one, it didn't have the sort of pop music soundtrack, and it didn't have that sort of.
This one had a classic score, like
exactly.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that they sort of pulled the rug out from under you, tried to get you invested in some of these stories, and like the story that it feels like is sort of true is the one that Keaton was trying to go straight in a way, and gets roped in by Kaiser Soze, and that's how this thing works.
So since you brought that up, I'll bring up one more thing. There's a discussion when Keaton wants Verbal to leave the crime scene because he's like, get out of here, take the money. No one's going to make it out of here alive. You might as well.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's where Kaiser Soze, talking to Keaton, actually gets the idea that Keaton was trying to go straight because he was actually trying to help him out. I think that part of the story was true, possibly.
I see what you're saying.
So that's why Verbal, talking to Chaz Palminteri could tell him, he's like, no, Keaton loved Edie Finneran. He had a whole life ahead of him that he was trying to go toward. He wanted to really remove this part of his life, the crime side of it.
Shoot the devil in the back, Agent Kuyan. What if you miss?
You know this movie pretty well, huh?
Just a little bit.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all three of them. Maybe we needed to make our blocks more about good movies. That might be good. Maybe we'll save the shitty movies for when we do like the horror off the rails sequel or something. But it makes it so much more enjoyable to even talk about when these movies are great. I don't know
if next week's episode is going to qualify.
Speaking of that,
I remember one of those movies not being so hot.
All right, exciting show. This was a lot of fun, especially watching Citizen Kane. Thank you again for introducing me to these films.
Yeah.
Next week, we have a special guest on, mutual friend of ours again, who's put together a block of Wesley Snipes films. Mm-hmm. I think that's the only real relation, right? Where it's not like subjective Wesley Snipes or gothic horror Wesley Snipes.
I think we'll get a further clarification on that. I thought there was something else to it, but I just know the movies that we're watching, and then I think we'll find out what the theme is later.
So the movies we are watching with Wesley Snipes are Demolition Man from 1993, U.S. Marshals from 1998, and Passenger 57 from 1992.
Always bet on black.
Yeah, I only know that line. I don't think I've ever seen Passenger 57. But I've seen Demolition Man probably more times than I'd like to admit.
So you didn't have HBO in the 90s is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I never saw U.S. Marshals. I've only seen The Fugitive. So it'll be interesting to see two of these three films that I haven't seen yet.
Oh, right on. Yeah. No, it'll be fun. As far as 90s action or whatever, it's going to be a fun perspective, and I'll be interested to see how these all connect other than their star.
Exactly. No, I'm really excited about this one. I love Demolition Man, so it'll be fun to revisit going to Taco Bell in the near future with Dennis Leary as an underground terrorist, I guess. All right, thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
Ciao. Now that Brian's watched Citizen Kane, I have a feeling you may never see him again. And like that, he was gone.
Xanadu.
Well, if I hadn't been very rich, I might have been a really great man.